At 73 years old, George Strait finally broke his silence on Willie Nelson. What he said will go down in country music history. George Strait, the undisputed king of country, has built his career on authenticity, humility, and a music catalog unmatched by anyone. But for years, there was one name he rarely spoke about publicly: Willie Nelson. That all changed recently when Strait finally opened up, and his words about the red-headed stranger might just change how you see both icons forever. Hey, if you're enjoying this trip down memory lane, don't forget to click subscribe. It's completely free, and this way you won't miss any of our next stories from the stars you grew up with. Before George Strait became the king of country, he was just a skinny kid from a dusty Texas town you've probably never even heard of. Petite population, barely a blip on the map, no spotlight, no record deals, no fancy Nashville connections. Just a boy who woke up before sunrise to work on his family's cattle ranch, sweating under the Texas sun while dreaming about a life nobody around him thought was possible. But here's the twist. Those long days on the ranch didn't just build his muscles, they built something far more dangerous in the music industry: authenticity. While other singers would later fake cowboy boots and borrow twang for record sales, George Strait lived it. Every callus on his hands, every dust storm he rode through would become the unshakable foundation of his career. And yet, almost nobody outside of his hometown believed this kid would amount to anything. He wasn't the loudest, he wasn't chasing fame, and he sure wasn't playing the industry game. But what people didn't see was the quiet fire inside him, the kind of fire that doesn't burn out. That fire would one day take him farther than even Elvis or the Beatles on the charts. But before that crown could ever touch his head, George Strait made a decision that shocked everyone around him. At just 19 years old, instead of chasing his music dream, he enlisted in the United States Army in 1971. Think about that. While most future stars were begging for record deals, George was wearing combat boots and answering to drill sergeants. Stationed in Hawaii, it looked like music might just become a forgotten dream. But here's where fate intervened. On that base, George stumbled into the Army-sponsored band Rambling Country. It wasn't a glamorous stage in Nashville, it was smoky halls filled with soldiers blowing off steam after long days. But when Strait opened his mouth to sing, something happened. People stopped talking. They listened. Even hardened men who didn't care for country music leaned in. That's when George realized his voice wasn't just good, it was magnetic. And while all this was unfolding, something even bigger was happening in his personal life. He reconnected with his high school sweetheart Norma, the woman who would become his rock for the rest of his life. Against all odds, the two eloped in Mexico in 1971. Think about that for a second. He's a soldier, broke, with no guaranteed future, and instead of waiting for stability, he gambles everything on love. That bold move didn't just change his life, it gave him the anchor he would cling to through fame, tragedy, and unimaginable loss. By the time he left the Army in 1975, George Strait wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a man with a voice, a wife, and a destiny that was about to rewrite the history of country music. What happened next wasn't just success, it was domination. George Strait didn't just get a few hits, he rewrote the record books. Over 60 #1 singles, that's more chart toppers than Elvis Presley, more than the Beatles. Let that sink in. A ranch kid from Texas, once ignored by Nashville, ended up breaking the records of the most famous musicians on earth. Album after album, he proved unstoppable. He sold over 100 million records worldwide, pulling in awards like it was second nature: CMAs, ACMs, a Grammy, and eventually in 2006, induction into the Country Music Hall of Fame. By then, even his critics had no choice but to admit George Strait wasn't just a country star, he was a phenomenon. But here's the part that really blows minds. While other stars chased trends, reinvented themselves, or even burned out under the spotlight, Strait did none of that. He didn't need wild scandals, flashy reinventions, or over-the-top gimmicks. His secret weapon was even more shocking: consistency. Same jeans, same cowboy hat, same unshakable sound. And yet, every single time, the crowds got bigger, the records got stronger, and the legend grew louder. And then came the Cowboy Rides Away tour in 2013. Imagine a single concert drawing over 100,000 fans into AT&T Stadium in Texas. That wasn't just a farewell show, it was a cultural earthquake. A moment where people realized they weren't just watching a man perform. They were witnessing the end of an era, the final chapter of a king who had ruled country music for over 3 decades. Just when it looked like George Strait had everything: a skyrocketing career, a loving wife, 2 beautiful children, life delivered a blow so brutal it nearly broke him. Summer of 1986. George and Norma's daughter Jennifer, just 13 years old, was riding in a car near San Marcos, Texas. In a split second, everything changed. The accident was fatal. The Strait's little girl, the light of their lives, was gone. Now pause and think about this. At that exact time, George Strait was one of the hottest stars in the country. His face was on magazine covers, his voice on every radio station. But behind closed doors, he was living a nightmare. And unlike most celebrities, he didn't turn it into tabloid headlines or public drama. He did the opposite. After Jennifer's death, George Strait stopped giving interviews. Entirely. He refused to let cameras and reporters feed off his pain. To the world, he was still the cowboy king. But privately, he was a father trying to survive the unthinkable, and here's the part most people don't know. Instead of letting the tragedy destroy him, George turned his grief into something that would outlive him. He and Norma created the Jennifer Lynn Strait Foundation, a charity dedicated to helping children in need. Quietly, without press conferences or PR stunts, he made sure Jennifer's name would live on in a way that gave hope instead of sorrow. That silence, that refusal to exploit his pain, actually made him more powerful. Fans felt the raw ache in his music. Songs suddenly carried a weight that no amount of studio polish could fake. Every time George Strait sang after 1986, you could hear a man who had loved, lost, and somehow kept going. Through all the fame, tragedy, and chaos of the music industry, one thing never changed for George Strait. His family came first, always. He and Norma had already proven their love was more than a high school fling. Remember, they eloped in Mexico back in 1971 when George had nothing. No fame, no money, not even a promise of stability. That marriage became the backbone of his entire life. And in 1981, their family grew again with the birth of their son, George Harvey Strait Jr., better known as Bubba. Now, here's where the story gets interesting. While his father was conquering arenas and breaking records, Bubba wasn't chasing fame. He went the other direction, into the rodeo world. Team roping, dust, sweat, bruises, the same grit George knew from his own Texas roots. And George Strait, the man who could fill stadiums with a single announcement, suddenly became just another dad in the stands, cheering his son on. Picture this. In 2006, Bubba competes at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, one of the biggest rodeo events in the nation. George Strait is in the crowd, not on stage, not being the king of country, but just a proud father. Minutes later, he walks onto the stage at the same event to perform in front of thousands. One moment, he's a dad in the stands. The next, he's a living legend, commanding the spotlight. That duality, family man and superstar, made him untouchable. And that's the scandal Nashville never really understood. George Strait didn't sell himself to fame. He didn't sacrifice family for the industry. He managed to have both. A rock-solid marriage, a bond with his son, and a music career so massive it broke records nobody thought could be broken. For decades, George Strait stayed quiet. But now, his words about Willie Nelson reveal something deeper than music. It's about legacy, authenticity, and the spirit of Texas. Two men, two paths, but both forever bound together as giants of country music history